Good evening, and welcome to What's Your Story? My guest tonight is Janet Carville. She is a living, breathing history book. We are very fortunate that she has agreed to share her vast knowledge and marvelous memories with us. If you are interested in or are a part of Avon, Connecticut's history, this is the show for you. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you very much for having me on your program.
You know, when I interviewed you for the show earlier, I was fascinated when you pulled out a list of a family tree sort of thing, and it dated back to the 1600s.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about that? How did you get that document, and where did it come from, and who put all that information in there?
My great aunt, my mother's sister, did a lot of research. She was an old maid, old school teacher, and put together all the history. She found so many names and dates together, and she picked it up from the 1600s when Thomas Woodford first came to America. There's much more history that's over in England that she didn't write about, but I know about it. The heritage goes back to the 1300s, and the Thomas Woodford on my family tree is the same one that's on Queen Elizabeth's family tree. And that goes back to William the Conqueror and the Battle of Hastings in 1066. But that would take volumes to store in my house, but I do have the lineage from Thomas Woodford when he came to America in the early 1630s.
And your relationship to Mr. Woodford would be?
Many great-granddaughters ago.
Many great-granddaughters ago.
He was 10, 11, 12 great-grandfathers ago.
Wow. You know, I've been up in the Avon area, as you know, and one of the places I get information about families is obviously the cemetery, because you have a whole family in a plot. And I saw the Woodford's name next to the Avon Congregational Church. Are those Woodfords connected to you?
Oh yes, they all. Well, back then, everybody had 10 or 12 children, and it could be they died in infancy. They didn't have the health programs they have today. So all these Woodfords are related somehow, but the disadvantage to my family tree, if I have a Joseph Woodford that is one of 10 siblings,
okay, and
the notation on the family tree says C below, and the other 9 drop into the sea, and they pick up Joseph Woodford and go through his 10 kids, and if my ancestor is William, C below, and the others drop into the sea. So unless we can go back and find a common ancestor, if there was someone who has a Woodford from a couple hundred years ago, we'd have to find out when they were siblings to find out which one got dumped in the ocean.
Now, Janet, from talking to you, I understand that people often at the library out there in Avon, the librarian will often say, you need to go talk to Janet about this or that or the other thing.
That was more the town clerk in Avon, when people would come from all over the country. I've had people from California, I've had people from New York, and they go to the town hall to research some Woodfords. They say, oh, you want to talk to Janet Carville. And they give them my number, and over they come, and I dig out my tree, and quite often they have some of their family tree with them, and we compare notes and see where we connect.
Do you have any rascals in your family tree?
Oh, I'm sure there probably are some.
Any famous rascals?
Well, on my dad's side of the family, his mother was a Booth, and I have no proof. I don't have a lot of that family tree to know if we're
connected
descended from John Wilkes Booth or not. Maybe it's something I shouldn't pursue, not knowing.
Well, I understand Lincoln was somehow connected with somebody in your family anyway. Is that true?
Yes, before my great-great-grandfather, Chester Randolph Woodford, ran the farm, he was a young man, and he was wanting to sow his oats and see the world, and he tangled up with his uncle, who was near to his age, who was a James Bishop from Bishop's Corners in West Hartford.
Is that how Bishop's got his name?
That's the Bishop family. My grandmother was a Bishop, and Grandpa was a Woodford. Anyway, this uncle and nephew, who were 4 or 5 years apart, decided to take some clocks and go out to Illinois, because Connecticut was a large area extending way out to the west there, and they figured, let's go sell some clocks and see what we can do. So they're out there peddling their clocks, and the natives say, go on home, we don't want you here. And he said, well, I got every right to be here. Well, it got into a little push and shove thing, and he figured, well, maybe I better get a lawyer. So he looked on one of the street signs, and there was a shingle hanging out that said, A. Lincoln, lawyer. He figured, well, that sounds like a good English name. Maybe let's try this guy and see what he can do. Well, Lincoln proved that the clocks were made in Illinois and ultimately sent to Connecticut to have the outer casings put on. So he said, you've got every right to sell your clocks out here. So my great-great-grandfather stayed in Illinois for a little while, and I guess he dabbled in politics while he was out there. And as I understand it, they were forming some new territories and naming some new acreage. And he said, "Oh, why don't you name it Woodford County after me?" And there's a Woodford County out in Chicago, out in Illinois.
And that's how that came to be?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's just recently that I've noticed the Woodford Reserve trucks driving by from Kentucky. And Illinois is not that far from Kentucky. And I wonder if maybe some of my Woodfords got down there. And I don't know about that. I don't know if there's any link or not.
Have you had the pleasure of going to England yourself?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. Do you plan to visit? And
I better do it pretty soon. I'm getting too old to travel.
you're going to pick up some roots in England, maybe, you think?
Well, I feel comfortable with my heritage. And when we were doing some farm tours years ago, my husband had gone to Yukon, and he had a friend there that when people contacted Yukon and wanted to visit a working farm, he would call and send them, talk to Don, and Don said, "You don't want me, you want my wife." And I would be the tour director. Well, they had a group from Leicestershire, England, which is my ancestral hometown in England.
Okay.
And of course, nobody knew anybody from 300 years of separation, but it was interesting to reestablish the roots in the same area. So it was very interesting to talk to him.
Now, if you would you tell our viewing audience a little bit about your immediate family, your mother, your father, your siblings? Let's start with your dad. Where was he from originally?
He was English, but he was born in Beacon Falls, Connecticut, down near Waterbury.
Okay.
But he grew up as a child in Avon.
Okay.
And went to school in Avon. And my mother was born in Maple Hill, which I guess is a section of Newington. And then when she was a child, came to the farm. And Mom and Dad always told how they went over to the center of Avon, by the church where the railroad tracks went through town, and they rode the train to high school in Simsbury because Avon didn't have a high school. My dad went to the Towpath School, the brick building that they tore down. No, that wasn't even there then. He went to the white building that's now the Board of Education building in Avon.
Okay.
But when they went to high school, he and Mom took the train to Simsbury, up on Main Street in Simsbury, which is now the town offices and the police station, that brick building. That used to be the high school where my dad graduated, and Mom too.
You mean the current police station now?
In Simsbury.
That used to be the high school?
That used to be the high school.
Okay, all right.
And then they take the train back home. But when I went to school, apparently Simsbury couldn't take Avon students anymore, so the buses would go around all the routes in Avon and pick up all the kids and bring us to the Towpath School. And then one bus would take a whole load of us to Canton High School, because they were accepting Avon students until they couldn't, they had no room to take any more students, so then Avon finally had to build their own high school, and that was 61 was the first graduating class of Avon High.
Okay, let's keep it straight. And what was your father's last name?
Reed, R-E-A-D, which is different than yours.
So there may be a connection there to me some kind of way. We just got the spelling wrong.
Well,
absolutely. I'm probably in that tree somewhere, Janet.
Worth pursuing.
Absolutely. Okay, so your father's last name was Reed.
He was Reed, and his ancestral, George Reed, was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence.
Yes.
So we've been here a while.
Okay, and what was your mother's maiden name?
Woodford.
Woodford. Your mother was a Woodford.
My mother was born a Woodford.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so she became Mrs. Reed.
Yes.
All right, and you got married and became Mrs. Carville.
Yes.
All right, so I'm getting it straight now. All right, so we know about your mother and your father. Did you have siblings?
I have two sisters. One's older and lives in Delaware, and the younger one lives in Avon.
And where do you fall in the family tree?
I'm the middle one. I'm the middle of those three.
You're the middle of those three.
I was always taller than my older sister, so whatever trouble we got into, it was my fault because I was bigger.
Okay.
And if I got into trouble with my younger sister, it was still my fault because I was older.
Okay.
So I couldn't win.
All right. So tell me, if you would, where did you go to school? Where did you go to high school again?
I went to Canton High School, but I went to the Towpath Elementary School. I started out in the white building that's now the Board of Education building.
Yeah.
And when I was in 5th grade, the new brick building had been built, which they have since torn down because they found asbestos in the flooring.
Oh boy, yes.
So it's just a pile of dirt. Well, there's no other building there right now.
Okay. So, and you went to college. Now, you told me an interesting story in your day about going to college up in Rhode Island. Mm-hmm. Now, most of us today think of going to college. You apply, you get accepted, and you get the dorms and all that. When you went to college, there were no such things as dorms in Providence.
Not at that college. No.
Not at that college. No. So tell our viewing audience how you stayed and what you did.
Well, I went to Catherine Gibbs Secretarial School in Providence, and I applied to them after the end of my sophomore year in high school. I only wanted to go there. I only ever applied to one place, and if they had told me no, I don't know what I would have done. But they wrote back very politely and said maybe I should wait till I was a senior, and I reapplied when I was a senior. And there were only 5 of us from out of town. Most of them were local commuting day students at the college.
Okay.
And 5 of us lived in a private home. They had the bedrooms, and my roommate was from Aurora, Illinois, and I still exchange Christmas cards with her all these years later.
Really?
Yeah.
So 5 of you stayed in a private home. And how long were you at the college, Janet?
I doubled up and took the 2-year. I did 2 years in one. My marks let me do that. And
You did 2 years in one.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you came out of college, you had a degree in.
They didn't give you degrees as such. If you just simply passed the course, you were a graduate secretary of the school.
Okay.
But if you graduated like with honors or to a better degree, you were a certified secretary, and I am a certified secretary from the Catherine Gibbs School.
Now, was your mother college trained too?
She wasn't college trained, but she was a secretary to the headmaster at Westminster School in Simsbury before she got married. Private boys' school.
She was a secretary to the headmaster?
Yes.
Wow. How long had she done that?
Well, I guess from the time she got out of high school until she got married. It might have been a 5 or 6 year period before she stayed home and raised kids.
Okay. Do you remember what year your parents got married?
1935.
1935.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you what year you were born, but they got married in 1935 and had 3 children, 3 girls, and you're the middle one. Have I got that straight so far?
That's good.
All right, what are your earliest memories, Janet, growing up with your 3 siblings and your mom and your dad? Early memories. I think you said something about being 2 years old.
When I was 2, I went to my uncle's wedding. My dad was best man for his brother, and they got married. And what I was trying to convince my mother, they got married in a garden. Well, they didn't. The front of the church had racks of greens and trees and trellises, and just I thought it was a garden. It was the front of the church, so it was just all covered in green. She said, yeah, that was right. And I remember there was a piano out in the front hall there that had one of those seats that would spin around in a circle.
Yes,
and
yes.
My sister and I got on that one until we spun it fast enough so we fell off and bumped our head. But Mother said, yes, there was a piano out there. But that was when I was 2 years old.
Do you remember having radio in your home at that point?
My dad had made a crystal set, and he had a pair of headphones that I could wear, and the crystal set, the only thing it picked up was TIC FM AM back then, and I couldn't roll over because I had these great big headphones, hurt my ears.
Yes, yes.
But I could listen to that. But they had a radio downstairs.
Now, you were growing up in, shall we say, it's fair to say, what, the 40s, the 50s, and so forth, right? What historical event in the 40s? When I think of the 40s, a major historical event, of course, is Pearl Harbor, 1941, and of course, the death of Franklin Roosevelt when he died. Do you remember anything about those historical events or how your family reacted to those?
I don't. I remember more about Roosevelt than I do the Pearl Harbor. As tragic as it was, it didn't affect me in Avon, or as I perceived it. I thought that our local newspaper that we got was our local Avon newspaper that we got every day, and still being published today. And when the headlines came along that Roosevelt had died, I said, Mom, I didn't know he lived in Avon. I thought it was just our local paper and it was local news.
Yeah.
And it was national news.
So you can remember your family being struck by the president's passing.
During the Second World War, my grandfather, Woodford, was an air raid warden. He had a siren hooked up in his car, and when they said we were going to have a blackout practice, he would drive up and down the street with a siren going, and we would turn off the lights and pull the shutters, and Eleanor and I would hide in the front hall closet and play hide and go seek.
Is that right?
We were too young to realize. We didn't know the horrors of war. My parents didn't necessarily shield us from it, but we had never seen anything to make us ask too many questions. I remember in first grade, there was a plane that crashed over on the railroad tracks near where Old Meadow Plain Road is now in Simsbury, but we could look out the window from the school, and we could see the plane coming down in flames, and then we could see a parachute coming down. And I understand one of the people who bailed out of the plane landed in Hope Pond up on top of the mountain near the High Blind Tower.
Yes.
And came down through the woods and was horribly scratched and bloody, and it was fall of an airplane. It's no pleasant experience. But that's about all I remember of the war.
Okay.
I remember that my cousin and I would sit on her front porch steps, and we had our own special parade. We have the State Police rifle range up the road, and there were troops and jeeps and tanks that were going up Nod Road to that rifle range to practice for the war. And we're sitting on the porch waving our little flags, just the two of us. There was no band or no anything else that would be in a parade. But these soldiers were going up there, we found out later, to practice to go to war. But we thought it was our own special parade.
Now, you just mentioned Nod Road, N-O-D. There's a meaning behind that. Would you tell our audience what it is?
Way back when my ancestors first helped settle Farmington, Farmington was a much larger area. There was Southington, Farmington, and Northington. And Southington has kept its name for today. But Northington changed its name to Avon, but that wasn't until it incorporated as its own town in 1830. But in the meantime, the area north of Route 44, where the golf course is,
yes,
and at the base of the mountain, all in there east of the river, was referred to as the North District of Northington. And they would abbreviate that as N-O-D for North District, and that's Nod Road.
And that's how it became Nod Road. And it's
it.
still Nod Road to
It's
this
still
day.
Nod Road.
Still Nod Road to this day.
Still farming. I have a copy of the deed where my ancestor bought land bounded on the south by the highway, which would have been Route 44,
Yes.
bounded on the west by the river, and it was dated January of 1666.
1660, the 17th century. My
Yes,
goodness.
so we've been farming right
Yeah.
there on Nod Road for over 353 years.
Wow.
So I haven't been there all that time, but some days you can feel it.
No, you certainly haven't been there all this time. Janet, if you would, please, say that you're, I guess, in the 40s and 50s, you're becoming a young woman, right? You were in an environment that was largely like you. I mean, like they were white. Did you have much cultural exchange with other peoples as you were growing up? Any people of color that you worked with or knew that was a part of your life, of your family? Or was it strictly just Caucasians in that area, and that's how it was?
It was mostly Caucasian. We did have one black family, the nicest people. He was the paper delivery man for our Sunday paper, and everybody in town liked him. He had 3 children in school. I guess there were 2 younger ones that came, after I was out of school. But one was the year behind me, and he was their class president. One was a year ahead of me in my sister's class, very popular. And the older brother was a couple of years ahead of that in Don's graduating class. And I think we didn't have segregation in Avon. We didn't learn prejudice from my parents. People were people. I didn't care if you were green or purple. You were a nice person, I liked you. I didn't care what color you were. But when it hit home to me the hardest is when every year the senior class in high school would go down to Washington, D.C. for their class trip.
Yes.
And these popular kids couldn't go. And they would have to, back then, have had separate hotels, separate buses, separate restaurants, separate everything. And I thought, that's just horrible. And that's when it really hit me how the problems of segregation and what they've done to this country. I didn't feel it in Avon. We didn't have any problems. There have been other people of color that have been in Avon. I've had some good friends. It's not a problem with me. I'm just sad to see so much of it that you hear about, particularly down in the South, where there's so much hatred and segregation still going on.
Yeah.
And it's not right.
So growing up, you had would it be fair to say you had a relatively carefree life? I mean, your family was able to provide you the necessities of life.
Yeah.
You weren't hungry, you had shelter.
We had clothes and food, and we were loved, and, everything was fine. We didn't know any different. We didn't have any money, but that didn't bother us. We had the farm.
You didn't know you were poor?
No, we had everything we needed. I was in, I think, 7th grade before we got the first television set, and that was one of those little 7-inch things you had to sit right in front of her. You couldn't see it.
Do you remember the name brand of it, by the way?
I almost think it was Motorola.
Okay, all right, that may be. I was thinking Admiral, but that may be.
It might have been it was the size of like a Victrola. It would close up. It was just the itty bitty screen was only about 4 inches square.
And you got what, one channel?
Now, I think they got channel 3 and channel 8, and there might have been a third one. We got New Haven and we got Hartford, but it's all black and white.
So now I'm going to guess here, I'm going to go way out on a limb here. The roads weren't paved like they are today, right?
Not like today's, but they did come down and tar the road. The truck would come down with all this wet tar.
Okay.
And then the sand truck would come afterwards, and followed by somebody with a big heavy roller that would kind of roll it in, and then they let the traffic blend it in. But you could get tar all over your shoes from the sides of the road. It took a while to really work it in.
Yeah.
So we had that to contend with.
So now my earliest memories were of the Iceman coming with a big old block of ice to put in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
I remember the milkman delivering milk.
We had our own farm.
Yeah, do you remember the Iceman or the cold man coming to deliver?
We had coal delivered before we had oil, and being on the farm where we had cows, it was my job every night to take the empty bottles across the street to my uncle's house and put them on his front porch. He would take them out to the barn and get them filled, and the next morning he would bring them back and put them on his front porch, and when I saw that, I'd scoot across the road and bring home the fresh milk.
Okay, son of a
Raw
gun.
milk, best stuff in the world.
Best stuff in the world. So we're going to talk about the farm here. This is part one of part two. We're going to get to some of the other things that you've done, but growing up on a farm, right, which is what you did.
Oh, yes.
What were your duties? What did you do?
Well, somehow I didn't feel I had duties as a kid. I just figured it was my farm, my mountain, everything. We took picnic lunches up on the mountain, and there were 8 of us cousins that all lived within a quarter of a mile of each other.
Okay, so
And
you had
we
a
always-
gaggle of kids.
2 by 2 by 2. The cousins always seemed to pair off. We would take hikes. We would go up on the mountain all the time, and Mother never worried about having us get lost. She said, if you think you don't know where you are, walk downhill. You'll come out on Nod Road somewhere.
Okay.
And so we knew that, and we knew all the people around there. And we didn't have a problem with the bears and the turkeys. I never saw all this wildlife till just in the last 20 or 30 years. Not as a kid growing up. If we saw a possum, this was something, but usually the woodchucks or the skunks, maybe a raccoon once in a while, but that was it. Now we got coyotes and wolves and bobcats and you name it. I had a moose out in my backyard not too many years ago.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow. So how long have you lived where you are right now?
I've been in my house 60 years, and I grew up the first 20 years down the road.
You've been in your house 60 years.
60 years next year, I guess it is.
My goodness. And you lived down the road?
I grew up down there.
And how long did you stay there?
Well, I was 20 when I got married.
You were 20 when you got married?
It's been a while.
Okay, so you've been in that Avon area the whole time of your life?
Our whole world was Nod Road. If it was somebody's birthday or something, we might go over to where the funeral home is now on West Avon Road, where there was an ice cream bar.
Okay.
And we could get ice cream there. And if there was a real special occasion, and we went to a movie either in Unionville or Collinsville, way back then they had movie theaters, and we could stop at Sunnybrook and get some ice cream, and I would hop up on the stool, and they had these 3 women that worked in back there, and this nice lady asked me what I'd want for ice cream, and she'd make me a sundae. Never knowing my father's down the other end of the line paying for it. I just figured this nice lady was giving me ice cream.
So she was giving you ice cream because she liked you.
She turned out to be my mother-in-law.
Oh, I see. And when did you get married?
I married Don in 78.
1978?
Yeah, that was my second marriage.
Okay, and how many children did you have?
I had 2 and inherited 2.
Okay, you had 2 and you inherited 2. Absolutely. You're a grandmother now, are you?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay, you got how many grandkids you got?
7 or 8.
7 or 8
Last count,
grandkids.
yeah.
They come and visit Grandma?
Well, they live down the road. In fact, Christopher bought Grandpa Woodford's house. He's got 4 little ones. The oldest is, 9. They're all in elementary school at this point. And it's fun to see them grow. And I'm glad that he can, if he's running the farm now that Don's gone, I'm glad that he can be in Grandpa's house.
So I just want to make sure we're clear. How long has the farm, and we're going to talk more about that, been in your family with you? And I mean, I know it's been in your family line
All the time.
for a while.
Let's see. I got divorced in 77, so I needed a full-time job. And my mother had been doing the farm books for 30 years or so.
Yes.
And she said, boy, I'd like to get back into the garden club, and the girls have been asking me to play bridge. I wonder who I could get to work on the farm. And I said, Jeepers, what do you think you sent me to school for?
Okay.
So I took over the farm job at that point, and luckily I could work from home, which was a godsend. With 2 little kids, you can throw in a load of laundry and do some payroll at 6 a.m. and take a cake out of the oven and, make it work. Where if I worked in an office someplace else, it just wasn't going to work.
It was not going to work, yeah.
So I didn't mind doing it. I did it for 30 years.
You milked cows, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. We had a prize registered Holstein herd, and that was great stuff. Uncle Chet would always try to tell us as kids when we get in the back of the barn, he said, they've got 4 faucets on the cow.
Yes.
And you pump the tail, and one is white milk, and one is chocolate milk, and one is butter, and one is ice cream. Now you pump the tail, and he was trying to get the cow to make a mess out of things, but
Okay.
this didn't last too long.
Well, like I said, this is part 1 of the show with Miss Carville. And that's all the time we have for tonight's show. My thanks to my guest, Janet Carville. Everybody has a story. What's yours? Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, good night. Boom. See, we only got to question 8.
Oh, okay.